Good day, everyone. I am Karen Bonadio, Senior Director of Alumni Relations, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's Alumni Talk Policy webinar, Immigration in the United States. The Alumni Talk Policy webinar series features HCAS alumni and panel discussions about pressing public issues. This webinar is being recorded and closed captioning is available. I'm happy to introduce today's moderator, Karol Brown, MPP 1996, Managing Attorney, Immigration, World One Law Group, will kick off today's important and timely discussion. Karol?
Hi, thank you so much to the Kennedy School Alumni Group who has invited us for here and has coordinated this program. As Karen mentioned, my name is Karol Brown and I'm the Managing Attorney of World One Law Group, and I'll be moderating this panel of amazing immigration experts from different areas and who are going to talk to us about some of the current state of immigration. We're going to talk about some of the issues and policy solutions that may be proposed. And we're also going to talk about some of the obstacles to those policy challenges and policy solutions. So first, I want to give an opportunity for Celina Barrios-Millner, MPP for 2007, to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Celina Barrios-Millner, and I am originally from Venezuela and moved to Cincinnati, Ohio as a child. And the experience of navigating systems that weren't designed with me in mind has led me to pursue a career in social justice and equity and inclusion. I'm currently co-VP of the Office of Race and Equity Research at the Urban Institute, and have worked in state and local government as well as advocacy organizations.
Thank you, Celina. And we'll go ahead and have Adam introduce himself. Adam.
Hey, good afternoon, good morning. Adam Hunter, classmate of Celina's, MPP 2007. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Immigration Policy at DHS, was a day one appointee of the Biden-Harris administration, had been in DHS before as a career civil servant at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and have worked for foundations and nonprofits and consulting in between. So glad to be here.
Great, thank you. And Pamela, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here. Pamela Goldstein. I'm with the National Immigration Project. We are a national membership organization of committed attorneys and advocates seeking to protect the rights of all people, and especially those who suffer the most harm under our current criminal, legal, and immigration systems. We build resources for the immigrant rights movement, legal resources, and we also have an affirmative litigation docket. And we conduct administrative advocacy to shed light on egregious situations and propose alternative solutions. And while we are lawyers for the immigrant rights movement, I myself am in the development arm of the organizations, where I work with key stakeholders and funders and individuals who want to make an immediate, tangible impact on the immigrant rights movement and on immigrant lives through their philanthropy and private donations.
Great, thank you so much, Pamela. And let's go ahead with Felicia.
Hi, thanks, Karol, for the introduction, or the moment to introduce ourselves. Felicia Escobar Carillo. I am class of 2003 MPP, and ever since I graduated, I've been in and out of the immigration space wearing a variety of different hats. Currently, I am the chief of staff of an agency called USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. We're the main benefits processing agency of the federal government. Before that, though, I worked in Congress, I worked in the Senate on legislative reform, I worked in the Obama White House, the Domestic Policy Council, and I've also been in the advocacy space. And before I came back to government, I was in philanthropy, actually helping create a foundation that was focused on supporting the immigrant rights movement and immigrant integration issues.
Thank you so much. And as you can see, we have a panel that has a variety of perspectives and a variety of positions within the government and outside of the government. And I want to give each of you an opportunity to discuss what's the current state of immigration from your perspective, and what do you see are the major issues that you're working on in your position. Let's go ahead and start back with Celina.
Thanks so much. So at the Urban Institute, we're a nonprofit research organization that focuses on developing evidence to help decision makers and change makers design policies and programs to advance equity and well-being. And so we're, nonpartisan, non-advocacy organization, but some of the things that we're really looking at is the unique needs of mixed status families. There are almost 45 million immigrants in the US, and about half of them belong to are part of families where there's different immigration statuses within the family. And so as we're looking at the continued economic impacts of the pandemic and the recovery, we're seeing the lack of people accessing benefits, the lack of immigrant children, for example, benefiting from the expanded child tax credit due to having a parent that was an immigrant and thinking they weren't eligible, or not knowing how to navigate, or because the systems aren't designed for people that may have different immigration statuses, even though the children were eligible, right? So that's kind of what we're really looking at, and trying to develop data and studies to show this, because a lot of these families are often not captured. When we see programs that did great, we often don't look at them through that angle. The other piece I want to highlight is just, we all know this, immigrants are vital to our ongoing growth and economic prosperity. And so to the extent that programs are designed without immigrants in mind, or without taking into account the unique needs of immigrants, it'll be at our own cost as a nation. We saw, again, we have all of this data from the effects of the pandemic, but that obviously a lot of the immigrants that were part of the essential workers that were not able to stay home and suffered a lot of health impacts were also not eligible for unemployment insurance, for example, when they had to be, their places of business had to be closed, and the ripple effects that has on our communities. And so we'll get more into solutions later, but there's some interesting experiments on the ground on how to cover those gaps. And last piece before I stop hogging the mic, we're really interested in the intersectionality between race and immigration, disability and immigrant status. There's a lot of places where there's multiple multiplier effects that, again, data are not capturing. And so given that we're a research institution, we're really focused on demonstrating and talking to folks that belong to those intersectional groups to see how policies and programs can better serve them.
Thank you so much, Celina, for that perspective on the work that you do, and thank you for doing that work. We're going to switch to inside the government, at least currently. Adam, why don't you go ahead and share from your perspective, what's the current state of immigration in the United States?
Thanks, Carol. So in a word, immigration policy, I think, fairly is challenged. That's the word I would use. As Celina mentioned, we have outdated systems. We have a desire, and a need for immigrants to come and be successful in the United States. From where I sit, the biggest challenges that we're facing are on the displacement side. We are at a level of unprecedented global displacement, and that manifests particularly in our hemisphere with really record numbers of individuals who have fled their homes to neighboring countries and pathways further, and people who are regularly migrating to and through our hemisphere, even from outside. Where that manifests, in particularly for the Department of Homeland Security, where I sit, is at our southwest border, which during the last fiscal year 22, we had a record 2.4 million encounters in that one fiscal year. And we have a border management system that is really designed and I would say, a legal architecture that really has in mind Mexican single adults that are easily processed, many of which can be returned if they don't have a lawful basis to stay. And increasingly, we've seen families who have been coming to the southwest border and individuals from nationalities, from South America further afield, where we don't have the same ability and relationships to remove those without a lawful basis to stay, and differing processing challenges, especially as regards families. At the same time, we've been quick to respond and needed to quickly respond to certain acute crises, namely the Afghans who have been evacuated following the non-combatant evacuation operation, and thereafter Ukrainians in the case of Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine last year, and all the while seeking to rebuild our worldwide resettlement program, which was a shadow of its former self in the last couple of years, and we are striving back to achieve that 125,000 refugee admissions each fiscal year. And the tools to do all of this are dated, right? We haven't had significant immigration reforms in more than 35 years. We have, refugee definitions that are at least 50 years old, and these frameworks really don't reflect the way we live and work in the 21st century. The reasons that people are displaced and what drives movement. And of course, our infrastructure and how we are situated to respond has not caught up. So in a word, challenged.
I like that word, challenged. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that, Adam. We'll go next to Pamela Goldstein. Pamela, what is the current state of immigration from your perspective?
So our approach at the National Immigration Project is not fear-based. We believe that migration is normal and ongoing and ever-present. But if you look at the trajectory of US immigration policy over time, it's hard not to miss the fact that most of our laws are based in various types of exclusion. And at each iteration of the laws, there have been rationales for why certain groups should be excluded from pursuing lawful residence in the United States, and others should be included and given that opportunity to pursue lawful residence in the United States. And so understanding this history kind of changes the lens through which you view the immigration system. And it's hard, even if you look at some of the language underpinning some of the current laws. I think about entry and reentry prosecutions, not to sort of find the roots in a structural racism. There's even white supremacist language once you sort of peel back and see what's informing entry and reentry prosecutions at the border. So, but also to take it like into the current moment, and you don't have to go too back in history to find that structural racism. Advocates have pointed to the fact that people from Cameroon sought from Washington for 5 years the designation of temporary protected status, or TPS, that allows them to be in the country lawfully, temporarily. And it took 5 years to get movement on that. And Cameroon is war-torn and conflict, in an armed conflict. And it took Ukrainians to achieve TPS status after 1 week of conflict. Black immigrants comprise, I think the number is under 5.5% of the unauthorized population in the United States, and well over 10% of the immigrants in removal proceedings or deportation proceedings. And that's statistics from the period of 2003 to 2015, NYU and BAJI, the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And then I think of a specific example of one of our clients. Sithi Bin is in Southern California, and he was born into a Cambodian refugee camp in Thailand and came as a toddler and was not well equipped for life in the United States, made some mistakes as a young man, and reformed himself in prison so thoroughly that he was released early. And he's now a pastor in his community, and he mentors and teaches youth who were formerly incarcerated like him, and youth who are former gang members like him. Tremendous asset to his community. He's in his 40s, yet he is still fighting to remain in the United States and not be removed or deported to a country that he hasn't been in since he was a baby. So, all told, and it echoes a little bit what Adam just said, we feel that an aggressive, harsh approach to immigration does not comport with our modern current values in this country. And so my organization, are fighting to restore fundamental principles of due process and compassion to a system that has and is, quite cruel and destructive.
Thank you so much, Pamela. And thank you for really bringing that down to the personal stories. I think that's really important to remember that there are human beings behind these policies. And I think it's really important to share that. Felicia, go ahead and share what you see as the current state of our immigration system.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I agree with Adam that the word challenged is a good word to describe the system right now. I mean, it has been decades since we've implemented major reforms, legislative reforms to the law. And at USCIS, what we're trying to do, all of us in federal government, but our piece of this is really about within the confines of the existing law, knowing that I think everyone on this call would agree we need to change the law, understanding that we are operating under the current confines of the existing law, what we can do to really make sure that we're restoring faith in the system and that we're strengthening integration and inclusion efforts and reducing barriers to the pathways that exist. And there are new and exciting pathways that we've been able to forge over the last couple of years, even with all the constraints. So Adam mentioned humanitarian responses to the humanitarian crises that have happened. Obviously, the work around helping folks who supported us in Afghanistan also find a way to our country and permanent pathways. Thinking about the work we're doing in Central America to help folks have pathways here. But at USCIS, we're also really focused on making sure that the pathways that exist beyond those new humanitarian options are also being implemented as fairly and efficiently as possible. So there is an EO, an executive order that the president signed within the first few weeks of office. There are many EOs he signed, including several that engage that touch on immigration, but one that we're really guided by USCIS is Executive Order 14012, which is the restoring faith in our legal immigration EO. And there are several pieces of that we've moved on, that we're continuing to make progress on. We conducted a pretty extensive review of all the changes that had been made from a regulatory and a policy perspective in the last administration, and took feedback from folks around the country on the things that they thought were creating real barriers and which things we should prioritize for action. And so we've been quite busy working towards undoing and improving policies and regulations. There were a few regulations and policies that were particularly called out in that executive order beyond kind of the large scrub that we were asked to do. So public charge was particularly called out, and that speaking to what Celina was talking about, the challenges of some prior regulations that the last administration tried to pursue really did create more barriers for people who had access under the current law and have for decades, but were scared, and there was a lot of fear and confusion in the community. So we worked really hard to reform that law, to take back that regulation that was on the books, even though it had been stopped in the courts, and put forward our own proactive way forward on public charge. We've done things related to naturalization, both from the standpoint of processing the benefits. There was more than 1 million folks who were waiting for their naturalization interviews and to make it through the process. And we engaged in a pretty robust effort to kind of get through that backlog. We still have a lot of backlogs that we're trying to get through. And some of that was, as a result of COVID and having to kind of stop work. Some of it was the result of poor fiscal management previously. And we've been trying to get back on the right page. There was a potential furlough, and that impacted, and we had to freeze hiring, and that impacted the agency pretty significantly. We still feel the impacts of that, even though we've worked towards getting ourselves on stronger fiscal footing. But there are a variety of different things that we are working on. And I think that we're guided by this executive order. We're guided by priorities from the director, by the secretariat, and obviously the president, to try to make the current system work as best it can for the people who are actually trying to get that green card, that work permit, that naturalization, employers that are trying to bring workers here the right way, right? Without undermining that and without undermining American workers, and without also putting those folks who come here in vulnerable situations. There are a variety of different things that we're doing to really advance the creation of more pathways and the restoration of more faith in the system.
Thank you so much for really analyzing and also bringing up the impact of the former president and COVID combining to like really have a devastating impact on USCIS, the agency I work with mostly, and really addressing the challenges of kind of reversing some of those previous policy decisions and regulations and going into a different direction can be really hard for any administration. Let's go on to policies. What policy solutions are you currently advocating for in this current situation? Let's start again with Celina.
So we, like everyone else on this, we're not an advocacy organization, but concur with my panelists on the need for comprehensive immigration reform. It's something I worked really hard on in the early 2000s and continue to think that it's long overdue. I appreciate, all the efforts to work within the current legal framework. And I think part of what we're looking at is, so for example, with the president's executive order on racial equity and now furthering racial equity, we take a real data-informed approach to equity. And I know that those orders call on federal agencies to collect and report on data on impact of their programs across various races and other demographic groups that are established. And for us, it's really important that that data is disaggregated to the extent possible so that we can see unique impacts for example, like not just the Asian community, but looking at particular communities and particular geographies, and also taking into account immigrant status, because I think I always say government is for everyone, but government is particularly important for the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable include our low-income families, people of color, and immigrants, the disabled, and often a lot of people are all of those together. And so really understanding how programs are or aren't reaching each of those constituencies is really important when we're designing policies and thinking about how we are conducting outreach or informing the public about different services or supports that there are to support them and their families. And so I'm going to keep coming back to data as our love language, right? Like understanding what's happening in real time and responding to it. And also looking back at another important part of our work is evaluating past programs and ensuring that we don't recreate mistakes over and over when programs aren't as effective as they could have been. We looked at, for example, I mentioned earlier, those that didn't qualify for various forms of government assistance. New York established the Excluded Workers Fund it's part of their pandemic recovery efforts. And we looked at the incredible impacts of local and state leaders taking initiative to fill in the gaps within our current system. And in that case, it showed that providing that buffer to those families that didn't qualify for unemployment insurance, for example, really helped keep people from falling into dire poverty It helped increase access to healthcare. It helped increase family connections. And so we're looking to support state and local policymakers in innovative approaches to fill gaps or to account for some of the unique needs of their communities. And the last piece is just understanding the intersectionality of all of these. And for example, if you look at the justice system, you're more likely to see men of color who are disabled and caught up in the justice system. And a lot of that is because of supports that are not reaching them, and that extends to immigrant communities as well. I think rather than advocate for one specific policy, besides please comprehensive immigration reform, we really want to make sure that each policy, right, at each level is really designed with the totality of our residents in mind, and that really benefits our cities, our nation, and ultimately our own prosperity as a country.
Spoken like a true Kennedy School graduate, Celina. Data as our love language, and program evaluation, and equity. So love it. Thank you so much for sharing. And I totally echo comprehensive immigration reform. Congress, we need you to actually, solve things instead of complain about them. Adam, from your perspective, what are your policy solutions that you're advocating for currently with the Homeland Security?
Thanks. Yeah. And while we await needed reforms, our operators are 24/7 in the realities of today. And we, recently launched new processes for Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, Venezuelan nationals. Felicia hinted at this, and this is a new approach recognizing individuals who are displaced due to repressive regimes or lack of governance at home, and who have been irregularly migrating in large numbers to the southwest border, to offer an orderly alternative pathway that disincentivizes the irregular migration route. And yes, it does include a consequence, an enforcement consequence for those who still would come between ports of entry, but it allows individuals who qualify and who have a supporter in the US to be able to travel directly from their home country or a third country by air to the United States to their final destination. So it obviates the need to engage in that irregular migration journey, which for many is multiple thousands of miles, multiple thousands of dollars at the hands of smugglers who, where they are at risk of exploitation along the way, and all of the dangers that are attendant therein. So that is new. We launched for Venezuela in October, and for Cuba, Haiti, and Nicaragua in January, and we've seen a precipitous drop in the number of those nationals who we've encountered, and are moving, tens of thousands, up to 30,000 a month. We're able to get travel authorization to be able to come directly to the United States. And all of that is happening is part of a broader policy push by the administration to strengthen and bolster additional pathways for individuals who are still in Mexico of any nationality. We've created the ability for individuals to register themselves via app to schedule an appointment so they can present in an orderly fashion. We've nearly doubled the number of temporary non-agricultural worker visas available for this fiscal year, with a set aside for Central American countries and Haiti. And we've increased our resettlement goals from this hemisphere. And I want to note too that the kind of hemispheric language is intentional, because we've really had a sea change in the past couple of years with how not only the US, Canada, Mexico have been very strong partners for a long time, but really countries throughout the region have a much greater shared awareness of the challenges that the irregular migration has on them and on migrants themselves who are not accessing protection or subjected to all of the pitfalls of these irregular journeys and all of the challenges that comes with. This really culminated last summer when the president and heads of state from nearly 20 countries signed the Los Angeles Declaration for Migration and Protection, which outlined a vision and a series of commitments that we and many other countries are continuing to work toward in that spirit of shared migration management and an effort to create stronger lawful pathways together.
All right, thank you, Adam, for sharing some of those policy solutions that you are currently proposing to really deal with some of the issues of migration along this hemisphere, and particularly in the southern border. Pamela, what are the current policy solutions that you and your organization are advocating for in immigration?
Well, first I want to say here to Adam to strengthening and bolstering additional pathways, and here to Felicia in rats, I lost it for a second. Another policy solution that I was right with you on. It'll come back. So we have kind of a platform within the immigrant rights movement that presents meaningful steps to reversing decades of unjust immigrant criminalization and policing. The 1996 immigration laws, I almost called criminal laws, took the worst of the war or the tough on crime, tough on drugs era, and that included criminalization, excessive levels of punishment, imprisonment, punitive sentencing, including mandatory minimum sentencing, and imported that to the immigration system. And we've been living in that for decades, and it has led to racial profiling and disproportionate incarceration, a little bit of what Celina was talking about, deportation and destruction of immigrant communities of color, especially. So we feel that local and immigration law enforcement need to be disentangled. The entanglement of ICE and CBP with local and state enforcement has empirically perpetuated racial profiling and policing and has made communities less safe. We believe that data sharing, deputization, and detainer policies should end. They're expensive and they don't work, and they're cruel, and they don't make communities safer. End immigration detention. We feel, simply put, that people should be able to navigate their immigration cases at home or with loved ones or with family or in communities, and not behind bars in cages, where many Americans are shocked to learn that immigrants face a lack of liberty, lack of access to attorneys. I know, Karol, you know some of this, separation from their families, and subjected to medical neglect and sometimes abuse. And the criminalization of migrants. Migrant prosecutions should end. Immigrants who have contact with the criminal legal system, which Celina was calling the justice system, should not be subjected to double punishment, like I described with Sithibin. He served a term, he came out exemplary, he's now facing a second punishment for having been born abroad, and he's a tremendous asset to our country and a model. And the use of private prisons, contracts with state and local facilities, and immigrant-only prisons. And then I think the last one is creating a right to return home. A lot of people have been removed unjustly, wrongfully deported, including people with deep ties in the United States, forced to leave their families, their homes, their small businesses, their communities, their faith communities behind. And asylum seekers have been deported regardless of whether their lives are in danger. And this is because of policy changes that eliminated their previously viable claims to protection. So we need to provide people with a chance to return home.
Thank you so much, Pamela. I really appreciate that, and appreciate your highlighting the fact that, everyone knows that you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney, et cetera, in the criminal situation. But many people in the immigration space are facing the most complicated area of law in immigration, the dire circumstances of losing their right to their home, their family, their business, et cetera, and also are trying to navigate a system where they may not speak English or they may not understand English fully, and they're doing that all without the right to an attorney. And many people cannot afford the tens of thousands of dollars it may take to fight a deportation case. So it's really important that you highlight just the injustice of that and how difficult it would be for any of us to try to defend ourselves, but imagine doing so without speaking English, without understanding the system, and, you know, in a state of fear or behind bars while in detention. It's a really difficult way to be able to defend yourself.
And I remembered what my here to Felicia was
Okay.
for executive orders. That we felt that was the beginning. We want to see more. So it was a high point. And we're hoping, you know, I understand what you're saying about that executive order at the beginning of the term, and we're hoping for further movement.
We have high hopes for the Biden-Harris administration to move on immigration, and maybe in the spirit of bipartisan, Congress could actually, I don't know, pass a law about immigration that they haven't done since 96 in a horrible way, and a system that's really basically designed in 1965 before many of us were even alive. Maybe it's time to bring it into the 21st century. Just a thought. Felicia, why don't you go ahead and share your current policy solutions that you're advocating for?
Sure. I mean, and I'll just say that, you know, the executive order that I mentioned, it is guided like dozens of regulatory actions, policy actions, and pretty much the way the agency thinks about their work on a day-to-day. So, you know, I am all for additional executive orders, but I do want you to know that, like, it is a moment in time that, you know, where it was introduced and signed by the president, but it continues to guide all of our work. And I would say, you know, all of the kind of the director, when she joined our agency, when she was confirmed, she set some clear goals and priorities. And I think it's important to set goals and priorities wherever you are, but when you're in government, when you're trying to drive action amongst a huge bureaucracy, it's really important to do that, to actually, you know, get to measure whether, you know, from a data perspective, Celina, you're actually making progress and actually kind of moving the needle. Moving these big bureaucracies can be really difficult. So, I mean, I will say, you know, in terms of some of the things that we're working on from a broader perspective, we have, as I mentioned at the top, we have a backlog of many millions of cases. It's a historic backlog. It's never been as bad as it is. We also have historic filings. So the number of people who are applying for different things, because we have so many new TPS designations, which allow people to apply for work permits, or we have things like CHNV or U4U that allows people to also seek a benefit from us to work in our country. So it's great to have these additional pathways being created, but it does create more work. And so we have to figure out how to set goals to actually not just deal with the new work, but also address the folks that have been waiting for a while. And we're waiting when we got here. And so, you know, we did pretty early on when the director showed up, kind of set some really clear agency-wide backlog reduction goals. And we've been working towards achieving kind of her goal around processing times, which had gotten way too long, and we are working towards meeting those goals. And we've moved the needle in terms of the backlog not growing. It's, you know, it's kind of stayed steady and it's starting to go down, but we have a lot more work to get it back to where it needs to be. So that's something that we're really engaged in. And to do that work, we're deploying a number of different tools to really help us advance the ball. So, you know, the role of technology, leveraging technology to help us with our processes, like, you know, speaking of not being in the 21st century, right? Like there are processes that over the last 10, 15 years have really been improved in terms of in terms of moving paper files, electronic versus electronic filing. And then on the back end, there's a lot we need to do to make things work more efficiently for our officers that adjudicate and process cases. So there's a lot of work that we're doing around that, around leveraging technology to improve our processes, both to help individuals apply in a more streamlined way, but also to help with the process of actually adjudicating the benefits that they're seeking before us. So there's a lot of work we're doing and strategies we're deploying around technology. There's work also being done around customer service. Again, this is another place where I feel like it took a hit, and then having a backlog people, when you're waiting for something, you want to call, you want to talk to someone, you want to show up to a field office to ask about what's going on. And there were kind of policy put in place that really limited that. And in some of these kind of customer experience facing interfaces, we're not resourced in the right way. And so there's work we're doing around resourcing them better. You should be able to make, changes to your address one time online without having to call someone and waiting a month to get a call back. There are things like that we're working towards to make the system work better for the people we're trying to serve. And then also, I think, clarifying the forms, right? The processes that people use to apply for benefits and request services with us. Those are, again, that's very government-y, bureaucratic, right? But it is the kind of thing that people, when they're interfacing with the system every day, like Celina was talking about her experience as a young person going through the process, we need to make it as friendly to real people as possible. Many of us on this call are immigration experts and love to get in the weeds. But for real people who maybe don't have access to legal services because they can't pay, or there isn't access for a low-cost legal services provider, and they're going to have to do it on their own, we need to be able to create processes that they can do on their own. And so there's a lot of work we're doing to advance access to real people.
Thank you for, yes, technology would be lovely. Yes, reducing processing times would be lovely. I'm like a huge advocate for all of those things that you mentioned. All right, the last section that we're going to talk about are obstacles and challenges to implementing those policy solutions. Where do you see those obstacles and how can we get around them? Let's start again with Celina.
So I mentioned briefly in my introduction, but I spent a lot of time in local government and was most recently in working for the city of Boston and worked in our Office for Immigrant Advancement, and later was our chief equity officer. And I think a lot of what everyone here knows is that, immigration policy is a federal issue, but immigrants live in cities and neighborhoods and towns. And so a lot of the work that we did was how to orient all of our agencies to serve immigrants as they serve every other resident, because one of the benefits of having an immigrant affairs office is that you have this internal guide and advocate, but one of the challenges is that everyone's like, oh, you're an immigrant, go to that office. It's like, no, like immigrants need, the pothole filled outside of their house, or they need a bus stop closer to drop, for when their kid goes to school. And so a lot of the work that we did was what's called immigrant integration, or how to center the needs of immigrants into just day-to-day city services. And I think there's a lot of room in that space, and making sure that our systems work for immigrants where they live, where they go to school, where they work. Ensuring there's multilingual communications, that people can access city services. I mean, a lot of this is really basic, but I think we need to. There's so much opportunity, I think, at the local and state levels to get immigrants connected to services they qualify for, to connect them to vital organizations to support them and their families. And I think while we are working within the existing federal immigration legal framework, I think there's still a lot of work that we can do. I also, I'm Venezuelan. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, and I was here when the 2 plane loads of Venezuelan migrants were brought to Martha's Vineyard and later moved to Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And as just like a Venezuelan living here, I went to help, which was really hard because it's a military base where they ended up getting moved to, so you can't just go in. And, I ended up going in with one of the legal groups that was working with them just to help, literally like help people fill out forms. And you see the intersection of so many systems, like what Felicia was saying about a lot of things you can do through technology. And we were trying to help people get like cell phones just so that they can like access services, access donations that are being sent to them, communicate with their families back home, keep up with their USCIS paperwork. You know, you need a social, you need, you know, like, so there's just like so many systems, like to get people the phone to get them access, or to give people you can't just give people a check, right? If they can't open a bank account because they don't have the right legal status that the bank requires. So I think there's a lot of systems that are sort of, that have needs that have not, like, they have nothing to do with immigrant status, that I think can be changed just to make systems work more seamlessly for newly arrived immigrants and immigrants that have been here for a long time.
Absolutely. Thank you. And driver's license, just something as simple as driver's license, which many states deny to undocumented folks, but people need to drive. So just simple policy solutions can actually make a difference. Adam, from your perspective, what are those obstacles and challenges to implementing the policy solutions you're looking for, you know, besides Congress?
Congress is the well-worn one, and I'll be brief because I know we're running short on time too. You know, our challenge is that within the executive, there are limits to our authorities. And, you know, as novel as some of these parole processes may be, right, they're temporary, they don't provide status. So that durable status can only come from our co-equal branch. We also, though, have a challenge of the yin and yang of litigation, right? We've had processes that we've unwound, re-implemented, and unwound again, which of course takes resources and energy away from other things that we think we should be better focusing our efforts on. But one of the strategies that has been helpful, and at times it's an obstacle, and I think the Kennedy School audience will appreciate this, but the interagency partnerships. You know, we have certain authorities and responsibilities at DHS, but of course in managing efforts at the Southwest border, not to speak of even the hemispheric challenges, we are in close coordination with our State Department colleagues, our AID colleagues, our HHS colleagues as regards unaccompanied children. You know, it's really that sense of partnership and finding opportunities for shared execution and where missions can align that can lead to some bigger things, like, you know, really leading into that Los Angeles declaration that I spoke of. So that gives me some encouragement and is, you know, always fun in those interagency policy meetings.
All right, thanks so much. Pamela, any obstacles and challenges to implementing the solutions you're advocating for?
Yes. So there are a lot of challenges at the federal level, in the circuit courts, in the states, at the local level. And I think I'll just sort of talk about a little bit about sort of what works, because the problems are, I feel like I would risk a lot of what people hear when anybody goes to an immigration panel and hears what the problems are and the challenges are. So this is what we have found that works in our work, is go to where the movement is strong on the ground, partner with immigrant communities, provide our legal expertise and achieve wins and build power that can be replicated in other localities. And some examples are, we had litigation at the Farmville detention center in Farmville, Virginia. And at one point, the government sought to dismiss our lawsuit, and that request to dismiss it was denied, and the litigation was able to go forward, and we won compensation and damages for our clients. This was a detention center that had the largest COVID outbreak of any immigrant detention center at the time. In 2020, people became fatally ill. There was a transfer of numerous people with COVID symptoms into a facility, knowing that they were testing positive for COVID, where people couldn't socially distance or get access to things like hand sanitizer. It was a big lawsuit. We did it with a lot of people. But part of it was the immigrant community on the ground and the people speaking out, and some of them suffered retaliation for speaking out. So it's really like the strength and the movement and all the pieces working together. You know, attorneys don't change the world, but backing social movements and keeping immigrant movements at the center have a lot more power. The Sithy bin case I was talking about, you know, there's probably hashtag pardon Sithy. There's a whole campaign on the ground to get a pardon from Governor Gavin Newsom. So part of it is supporting individual case campaigns, advocating for lasting change. advocating for how enforcement decisions are made and looking at community-based approaches instead of detention, and just using all the tools at our disposal, knowing that we're in a marathon, not a sprint, and that's litigation, advocacy, movement building. And I think we're seeing a lot of success at the state and local levels. I mean, just this past year, there were numerous wins in shuttering detention centers, which was fabulous. There was the state of Maryland deciding that it was no longer going to partner with ICE and disentangle local law enforcement and ICE in the entire state. So, and there's been an increased access to pro se materials for people who are held in immigration detention. So these kinds of wins at the local and state level not only provide immediate protection and safety for immigrants there, but they give us kind of a roadmap for how to kind of push for change on the ground and in the courts at the same time around the country, while the country still struggles with what its bigger plan is going to be.
Right. And thank you so much for really highlighting the movement part of it, that it really is an incredible movement of immigrant rights that we're all in various ways affiliated with. We're going to go ahead and go with Felicia for obstacles and challenge, but I want to let you know the next part of our discussion will be questions. So if you do have a question for our panelists, please go ahead and raise your hand now and we'll be able to call on you and unmute you and do all of those lovely things when we're ready to have questions. Felicia, obstacles and challenges to implementing your policy solutions besides, Congress.
Yeah. Well, I will also go positive like Pamela. For me, a big obstacle is just moving the federal bureaucracy. And, you all try to engage from the outside. Folks like Adam and I are trying to do that from the inside. There's these are big apparatuses. You think about DHS, 230,000 employees. USCIS were just a little over 20,000. It's a big group of people to try to move in a direction. But that's a challenge that everybody on any issue has to deal with in terms of the bureaucracy of government. But on immigration, on the work we're doing in particular, I would underscore again what Pam said about just partnership, right? Like for us, and I tell my staff this and my colleagues this, a new policy manual update, a new regulation, it's not as good. It's not worth the paper it's written on unless it's being implemented correctly. And the way you do that is engaging with the people that you're trying to serve to better understand how they're receiving the policy guidance and how things can be changed and improved and how we can educate our workforce about, this is what we mean when we say do this. Like, these are the kinds of examples that you should be taking in mind when you're engaging in the work, and training is something we're increasingly focused on because we want to make sure our policies outlive at least the appointee team. So I think engaging, and you learn that by engaging the people we're serving, whether it's ALA, NGOs that are in the community every day and hearing feedback about how it's going. And so we've created an Office of Citizenship, Partnership, and Engagement. It's actually run by someone who is from Boston and knows the Kennedy School really well, Ava Malona. She used to run the Massachusetts Immigrant Rights Advocacy Coalition. Her goal, her charge is to really make sure we are getting out there. Well, we are building partnerships, state and local governments, with NGOs, with ALA, with other legal services providers, with academics, and what have you. So it's definitely something that, as we think about the big challenge ahead of us and how we get as much done as possible within our limited time, a big part of that is building the relationships with the community and getting that feedback loop.
We love that USCIS is actually really engaged in that conversation rather than that sort of enemy combatant role that might have preceded you. We do have a question from our audience. The first question would be by Diego Garcia Bloom. Diego, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you for this chat. It's been very interesting. My question is not about navigating the current legal framework, but envisioning what ideal framework could be if we're writing a new law. And I know that's a long kind of dreaming, but I think that lawmakers should think of that way. In the United States, you can live here for a long time and not have a path to citizenship or a path to legal residency. That happened to me. I lived under an E2 visa for a long time, and it wasn't until I became a nuclear engineer that I got a chance to get a green card. A lot of places, for example, in Europe, if you live 5 years legally somewhere, they offer you a chance to become a permanent resident. So, and that's also based on ethics, that after living here for a long time, you earn your right to be here. And if not, that's something that is, not ethical to deny you. So I wanted to ask all of you, also acknowledging that the system is so broken that people will still try to come here. What is the kind of best legal framework that both has good ethics behind it, but that makes the best out of the immigration system to improve the country and the economy?
That's a brilliant question. Anybody want to jump in and answer? I know from my perspective, I would love to have a system that actually acknowledges family reunification and confirms that families should be able to be together, and that doesn't discriminate against people by country of birth. I don't think there's any reason why Indians have to wait 10, 20, 40 years for a green card when somebody from Pakistan or Zimbabwe gets a green card in 2 years. It makes no sense to have people have to wait just because the country happens to have 1 billion people in it. That's just me. Anyone else want to jump in and say like what their ideal immigration reform would look like?
I mean, it sounds to some extent, Diego, that you're talking about opt-in models for community support, and we would support that. An opportunity to play an affirmative role in your community, as opposed to some of these alternatives to detention models, ATDs, which are also seen as destructive, and these ankle bracelets and things, like have people in communities. This is what I said earlier. I don't think it's not achievable. I think actually all over the country, there are communities able and willing, and we've shown that can absorb immigrants and support them through their immigration cases. But we haven't tried it because our model is actually, frankly, very remunerative, very, the word I mean. It's remunerative. One thought, other models, other ideas.
Anyone else? Celina or Adam or Felicia?
Yeah, I mean, I second the notion, of course, that people who are here, who are staying here, need a clearer path to stay here. I mean, I think that's kind of threshold. And I'll also observe that, our alphabet soup of the various visa categories we have, right, predate the internet, predate how we work, predate how we think of family. So I think we do need new ways to ensure that families can come together, that people who are seeking work can, be here and contributing all the skills that we know they have and need, and our structures to do so are woefully inadequate.
Woefully inadequate. That's a good word for it. Yes. All right. Anyone else want to jump in on this vision question?
I'll just share, anecdotally that as everyone knows, and as folks have mentioned here, Venezuela has been in an economic and political crisis for some time. And my cousins of my age and younger that vowed to never, like when we left in the early 80s, they thought we were crazy, but who have now had to leave to seek opportunity. Like none of them have come to the US. They're brilliant. They're our family. We would love to help them. And, it's just been fascinating to see Spain, Peru, Canada, like how they've been able to go and make a life for themselves and get on a path versus here where they actually have family, and it's in some ways closer physically to where they, Venezuela is. So it's just been really interesting to see. I'm like, oh, and you did that, and now you're able to work, and just seeing other countries where things, again, not as a scholar, but just anecdotally, my family's experience, and it's been really hard for us to now be spread all over the globe versus like, the immense talent they could have brought to this country.
All right. Well, we only had an hour, and I know that we touched on an incredible array of challenges, of solutions, of obstacles to those solutions. And we could probably talk for days, weeks, months, years, and we are going to do so. But I'm going to leave this with call your congressman, call your senators, call your congressmen, call them again, and call them again. Even if you don't have the right to vote, call your congressman. We really need to put the pressure on and advocate for real reforms, real solutions. And it's really going to take a movement. I so appreciate the Kennedy School for bringing us together. I really appreciate the opportunity to moderate this amazing group of people. Thank you so much for giving us of your time and your perspective. And thank you for all the work that you guys do. And we'll go ahead and leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you for our panelists for a dynamic discussion. And we look forward to keeping you engaged in future months. For the most up-to-date school news and events, please visit the HKS alumni website. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all.